Viewers like you make this program possible. Support your local PBS station.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from Safeway stores.
Potage Parmentier, homemade French soup. Nothing tastes so good or smells so good. We're doing soups today on the French Chef. Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Today we're going to do soups. The French, of course, are very famous for their elegant sauces and their complicated main courses and their rich desserts. But they're also very famous for their soups. A lot of people, when they think of a French soup, think of onion soup. But there are a host of other soups that are lovely, simple, delicious, inexpensive, and delicious ones. And we're going to do two of them today. One of them is watercress, and the other one is the basic French family soup, potage parmentier, leek and potato soup, which is the backbone of the nation. It has many variations, one of which is vichyssoise, and of course another cousin, which is watercress. And we're going to start with the easiest and the most basic, which is the leek and potato. And it starts out, of course, with leek. And the leek looks like a great big scallion, and it has a root here, and it has its green leaves up here, and it's a very common garden vegetable, though a great many people in this country don't know about it or don't use it, but it's available everywhere, and if your market doesn't have it, ask them to order it for you, because it's not only good as a vegetable, but it's wonderful for pot au feu or boiled dinners, and it's perfectly delicious in soup. It has a special perfume that's like an onion, but also, well, it's like itself, and it's just wonderful with in soup. I just cut the root end off rather quickly so you didn't see it. That was that long, hairy thing here. And then cut off some of the leaves up here, and then any leaves which are a little bit old or withered, just remove. And then you have to wash the leek, so you want to take a knife and split it lengthwise this way, and then split it lengthwise with a quarter turn this way. We're going to have 3 or 4 cups of leeks today, so we need about 3 or 4 leeks. I just want to show you how to wash one. And now, to wash it, you'll see why I split it when you see how it's washed now. You just put it under cold water, and then rub it between your fingers. You have to separate each leaf because the dirt goes right down almost to the white part of the leek. And be sure that you get all of the dirt and grit out. And no matter what you're going to use your leeks for, you would wash them this way. Now this is a Japanese knife that my sister-in-law gave me, and it's used for harikiri or kukisaki, or whatever that's called, and vegetables, depending on what your mood is. And it works out very nicely for vegetables. Now, to cut up the leek, you cut off the part here, and we can use, for this soup, we can use all of the green part, too. For some soups, such as vichyssoise, you would just use this white part. But for the leek and potato, we can use the whole thing, and then cut it in half, and then just chop right down. This doesn't have to be cut up terribly finely, because in this kind of a soup, if you want to serve it sort of the family way, you don't have to puree it or anything. You just serve it as it is, and then just cut down all the rest. If you were making a soup using just the white part of the leeks, you could save all the green parts if you were using making a bouillon, because they're such a wonderful flavor. Now we want 3 or 4 cups. I have here about 3 cups now, and this will make 4. Now, if you cannot get leeks, you can use onions. They won't have the same flavor, but you can make an extremely good potato and onion soup. It's done in exactly the same way, and you use 3 cups also. And then we have potatoes that go in, and I've chopped most of them, and here's another one I will illustrate, this great harikiri knife. Then these just need to be chopped rather roughly also. And these again, you would want 3 or 4 cups of potatoes also, so I better get back my measure and measure them. In this kind of a soup, the proportions, as in so much of this kind of cooking, are not very important. I just happen to have found that about 3 to 4 cups of leeks or onions and 3 to 4 cups of potatoes and water. I just have a quart of water in my saucepan here. And as for the type of potatoes, you can use any type you want. It depends on what effect you want. I'm using boiling potatoes because I like the potatoes to have a little bit of sort of consistency after they've cooked. But if you use a baking potato, that will sort of all disintegrate into the soup, because that's what the baking potato does, because it's mealy. And now you can cook your soup either in an open pot or in a pressure cooker. And I'm going to cook them with the pressure cooker because it's so fast. The open pot takes about 40 to 45 minutes, and the pressure cooker takes about 15 minutes in all. And all this is now, we just have a quart of water and our 3 to 4 cups each of leeks or onions and potatoes. And then we want about 2 teaspoons of salt. I'm using this coarse salt. And pressure cooker, there's several types of them. This happens to be an old model, but they all work under the same principle. You have a lid which makes a tight seal with the bottom of the pan in one way or in another. In this one, it has a rubber gasket here, and then you have flanges on the edge of the lid which correspond to the flanges on the top of the cooker. And when you put the lid on, the flanges meet, and then you lock it in by pushing the handles together. And there's several kinds of cookers, and be sure when you use a pressure cooker that you very carefully read everything in the directions, because they're safe to use and wonderful to use, but you must be sure to read the directions to find out exactly how they work. I learned that the hard way when we were first married, and I was given this pressure cooker. And I'd seen my sister-in-law use one, and I thought I knew how to do it, and I was going to make some chicken soup, and I had a whole lot of chicken, and I filled the pressure cooker practically up to the top. I hadn't read the directions saying, do not fill it more than 2/3 full, and so I got it all cooked nicely. And then when I went to release the pressure, it didn't seem to release, so I thought, oh, well, I'll just take the knob off. So I took the knob off, and all the soup went all over the kitchen, and I had just washed it. So I just washed the kitchen. I was furious, but after that, I read every single word in the pressure cooker, and I found it in the manual, and I found it an extremely good machine, particularly for doing soups like this, because this is only going to have to cook 5 minutes as soon as the steam comes up. Now, you've noticed now that the lid is on, the steam is beginning to come out of the vent. And no matter what kind of a cooker you have, there is some kind of a vent, and you always have to wait until the steam comes out in a really rather large stream. And then as soon as that happens, you always have some kind of a knob. And that goes on. See, now you can hear it going out, so this goes on. And then you have to wait until either the pressure cooker makes a hissing noise or you have a nubbin. There's a little black nubbin on this knob which will rise up. On the new model of this particular cooker, it doesn't have a nubbin. You just wait until the gauge begins wiggling and making a little hissing noise. But with this one, we have to wait until it comes up to its 15 pounds pressure. And in most cookers, you can cook either at 5 or at 10 or at 15 pounds. But for most general cooking, it is 15 pounds. Now remember, no more than 2/3 full, and you won't have any trouble. And the reason that the pressure cooker works, I can't remember the whole history of it, but I think it was used particularly for people living in high altitudes. When you try and boil water, and the water looks as though it were boiling, but the vegetables are not cooking because the water boils at a lower temperature than 212, and so they developed, I believe, the pressure cooker so that you could bring the water to a higher heat and finally manage to cook your dinner. And then from that, they found how quick and fast you can cook things with the cooker. I don't frankly use mine much except for making soups, but for vegetable soups and also for making stocks, I think it's wonderful. However, I find that you must be sure and not over pressure cook. I find with vegetable soups, 5 minutes is enough, and then you have to let them cook a little bit uncovered. Now look at the knob here. That's coming up, and it's almost come up to its 3rd line, and as soon as it begins to make a little hissing noise, then we know that it has its 15 pounds pressure and is all ready to go. And that happens very quickly. It's almost there. I found, like in making chicken soup, that if I cook it longer than 20 minutes under 15 pounds pressure, it sometimes develops a rather funny taste. So I think 20 minutes, and then I let it cook for about half an hour uncovered. Now you can hear it's beginning to hiss, so immediately remove it onto low heat. And then I'm going to set the timer because it has to go for 5 minutes. Exactly. And now while that's cooking, we were going to do another soup. And this, of course, is the easiest soup to do because it's just cooked in water. And we're going to do another method which is more haute cuisine. That means a little more fancy and also has a little more calories in it as well. And in this one, you would start cooking your vegetables in butter first. And this, you could do this with your leek and potato. You could cook the leeks first in butter. It gives them a little more taste and also a little more calories. And so this one is going to be a watercress soup, and I'm going to cook some leeks in first in just an open pan. I'm using 2/3 cup of chopped leeks, or you could use 2/3 cup of chopped onions. It wouldn't make any difference. And they should cook slowly until they are entirely soft and limp. Because this watercress, which is a very delicate soup, cooks very quickly, so you have to be sure that your leeks or onions, which give the added flavor, are thoroughly cooked. Now here is the watercress. And this grows in marshy land, or I think in little streams, and it seems to grow all winter because you can get it all time of the year. But a little bunch like that costs 39 cents. And it is, it has sort of a slightly peppery taste. It's delicious in a salad. You can use it with endive or with native lettuce or with avocados, and it's extremely good as a soup. And the French name for it is cresson. And this soup is going to be called potage au cresson, and it's one of the nicest of the French soups. And with this, I'll make enough for about 4, and I will use 1 bunch of watercress. And you wash the watercress, and then because it's very delicate and it wilts awfully quickly, I found absolutely the best way to keep it is to keep it in a bowl like this, completely submerged, covered with cold water, and in the refrigerator, and it keeps very nicely for 3 or 4 days. But if you don't have it in water, you'll notice that it will wilt in about a day. And it's usually the little bunch is tied together with either string or a rubber band, a band in this case. And then you can use the whole business of it when you're going to use it for soup, because the little stems are very tender. And then just take any knife and chop this up. because this is going to then saute with the leeks or onions. See, that knife really works very nicely, I think. And then your leeks or onions would probably take about 10 minutes of very slow cooking. I'm not going to leave it in that long because I don't want you to have to wait 10 minutes. And then in goes your watercress. And then that would cook for 3 or 4 minutes and over fairly high heat because you want all the water in the watercress to evaporate, and you also want the watercress to turn limp. And then as soon as it's turned limp, you will add the rest of your soup. Well, this soup cooks very quickly, and it can also, you can get all the preliminaries of it done ahead. That's one of the nice things with soups. You can do so much of them ahead of time, particularly in the leek and potato soup, which is now almost done. Yes. I just have to wait about 30 seconds before that bell goes off, and I think I'm going to hurry it up a little bit. Now that's 5 minutes of cooking, and then you want to release the pressure right away. And you do that by putting it under the cold water tap. And you just have to, it takes about a minute to release the pressure. In some recipes, in some types of cooking, you let the pressure go down by itself, but in the vegetable soup where you want to finish the cooking right away, you force it down with cold water. And then you wait, and you'll hear a hissing noise. There. Can you hear that? You cannot open the pan under pressure. If you took the knob off before, you'd hear that sort of sigh of release. You take the knob off and all the soup would come out on the ceiling. But as soon as you hear that, it's done. And then you take your cover off. And then this is to simmer slowly for about 10 or 15 minutes more. And you'll notice that if you taste it now, just have a taste when it's just been pressure cooked, it has very little taste. And that's because for some reason under pressure there isn't an exchange of flavors between the potatoes and the vegetables and the liquid. So you have to let it simmer for about 10 minutes until it's ready to turn into a soup. So now I'll go back to the watercress. And now after the watercress is limp, that's about 2 or 3 minutes, and the liquid has evaporated, then you put in 3 tablespoons of flour. And this acts as a very light thickening. And this is really very much just like cooking a sauce. Any sauce where you always cook the flour and the butter for a minute or two before you add a hot liquid. And then let that cook for about a minute or two. And then pour in your liquid. And this is a light chicken stock, or you could use a canned chicken bouillon and water. And I'm going to put in about 4 cups there, and that is hot. And put in a little bit and then stir it all up, and then add a little bit more. And then this will cook for about 5 minutes. And all of this preliminary you can get done ahead of time and set aside. In fact, at several points you can set it aside. And so I have some that has already simmered, so I will use that. Now this is exactly the same, except it simmered for 5 minutes and is now ready to be pureed. And you can puree it in an electric blender, or you can use one of these food mills. And this, I really like the food mill better, I think, because I think the blender turns things sort of into baby food, which I don't like. Because it purees it so thoroughly that there's practically nothing left of it. Now with this, you just run it through, and that takes everything, that sends all of the watercress right through this little, right through the disc here, and then you always have a little bit on the end. And now we're ready to do the enrichment for the soup, which is going to be cream and egg yolks. You see, this is a company soup. It's not a no-cal one the way the other one is. I'm going to use 2 egg yolks and a little bit of cream. I'll put in about half a cup of cream. This is the same system always of whenever you're going to enrich anything hot with some egg yolks, you always have to mix something cold first with the egg yolks. And then just mix it enough to blend, and then very gradually pour your hot soup back in. And the theory in this is that if you poured your hot soup right onto the egg yolks, they would scream in anguish and curdle. So the only trick with the egg yolks, and we've done this several times, is to treat them very gently and heat them gently. And after you have just warmed them a little bit, then you are ready then to heat them again. And this is to poach the egg yolks or allow them to come very slowly to heat up and to thicken. And then you stir it over moderate heat. You don't want it to come to the boil, because it can come to the boil without stirring, but it's more delicate if the yolks just thicken a little bit. It's very much like making very nice scrambled eggs or a custard sauce. Actually, that's exactly what it is a custard sauce flavored with watercress and leeks. You see, that's just very lightly napping or coating the spoon, so it is done. And this, you can, if you're doing this ahead of time, you would mix your yolks and cream in your hot soup, and then you'd set it aside, and then just before serving it, you'd heat it up until it was warmed through, and then at the final minute before serving, you give it an even additional enrichment with butter. And you just put your butter into the pan, into your hot soup, and this you can only do at the very last minute. This also thickens it and then gives sort of that lovely French taste that you really don't find in any other cooking, of the butter having melted and all its lovely flavor going into the soup. It gives what the French would call a sort of a velouté or an unctuousness. And then, of course, you would very carefully put in all of your seasoning that you needed, tasting it very carefully for salt and pepper. Now, this watercress soup is also extremely good if served cold. If you're going to serve it cold, you do it exactly this way, but you would leave out the butter enrichment. Because if you put the butter in, then the butter, when you had chilled the soup, would congeal. So all you would do would be put in a little bit more cream and then put your soup into the refrigerator until it was well chilled. So that's a lovely soup, and a particularly nice one for dinner. And now we are here back with our leek and potato soup, and that has now simmered for about 5 or 6 minutes. And you taste it again, and if you find that it didn't taste, it might need another 4 or 5 minutes of simmering. But it's amazing the difference that little simmering makes. And then at this point, see, we've only had a quart of water in there. You can then put in some milk, but you never would put in the milk until just before you were serving it. I'll put in about 2 cups there, and then you can serve it just like this without mashing up the vegetables, or you can take one of these forks, and you see how it looks now with the rather large vegetables, which is nice in a sort of a peasant way. But you can just take a fork or any kind of a potato masher and mash the soup. And just mash the vegetables in a little bit. I think there's something very nice about a soup that has sort of large vegetables in it. And then with this, you can also serve this exactly the way you'd like. I mean, just the way it is. Or you can put in some cream, which is extremely nice, a little bit of heavy cream, and you notice tasting that just that little bit of heavy cream gives a lovely flavor to it. You could also use sour cream, or Also, at the end, after you've put in a little bit of cream, you could put in some butter. And again, that just little bit of butter gives a perfectly lovely taste to the soup. Now, you can puree the soup, just the way we pureed the watercress soup. And what vichyssoise is this same leek and potato soup made exactly the way we've done it, with a little more cream in it, pureed, and then chilled. And be sure that if you puree, if you're going to serve vichyssoise, that you oversalt it a little bit, because a cold soup begins to lose its savor a little bit. So that if you oversalt before you chill it, then it'll come out just about right. And then the vichyssoise, after you have pureed your leek and potato soup and put in the heavy cream that you like, you then chill it, and then you always serve it with chopped chives. And these are chives here that you can get most any time of the year in a little box. And to cut them up, you just take off the top and just chop them very fine. Some people like to chop them with scissors. I don't think it makes any difference what you do as long as you get them finely chopped. Then you have your soup nicely chilled in the refrigerator and all ready to serve. And just before serving it, you sprinkle on your chives. So there's our vichyssoise, and then there are the chives that go on top of it. This soup was invented by Louis Diat, who was a Frenchman who was a very famous chef at the Ritz Hotel in New York. And he writes about it in his book, saying that because of course in France it doesn't nearly get as hot as it does here in this country, so they haven't developed cold soups the way they have here. And he just suddenly thought, well, he would make a leek and potato soup and chill it and put on chives, and it's become so famous that even the French serve it now. So here is our grandfather of all soups, the leek and potato, which is steaming and ready to eat. This is, as you can see, this is really a no-cal soup, and you don't have to put anything in it that you want. You can just put in a little bit of milk, and if you want to make it richer, you would put in a little cream and a little butter. And it's also very good to use as a basic soup for any kind of leftover vegetables you have. When you have dinner at one of those little French restaurants, it's practically always this base of leek and potato, and then they have put in carrots or broccoli or whatever vegetables were left over from lunch. So it's a wonderful soup to know about it. And homemade soup is such a treat. It smells so good when it's simmering, and it's your own soup made your own way with fresh ingredients. It just has a specially satisfying taste, and it really smacks of the happy home. That's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
Julia Child is co-author of the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking.